Atheists are prohibited from holding public office in 8 U.S. states: Pennsylvania, Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Mississippi, Arkansas, Texas. Wait, if I live in Texas, I can't run for public office? Hold on. All right, here's a Texas local news site. Unenforceable Texas constitutional provision prevents atheists from holding public office. Texas is one of 7 states that has a defunct provision in its constitution barring atheists from holding public office. Article 1, Section 4 of the Texas Constitution states, "No religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust in this state, nor shall anyone be excluded from holding office on account of his religious sentiments, provided he acknowledge the existence of a supreme being." But the U.S. Constitution's no religious test clause makes it clear that restrictions like the one in Texas are unconstitutional. The issue came back up in 2014 when a candidate running for the Austin City Council distributed a mailer claiming her opponent was an atheist and therefore legally barred from holding public office in the state. Wow, that's incredibly petty and bigoted. So, while the requirement can't be enforced, it's still on the books because it's never been legally challenged by a candidate and because no candidate has been denied the opportunity to serve because of it. Interesting. It looks like an atheist needs to run for public office in Texas openly. I mean, they're not going to get elected, but still, maybe just to confront this more directly. So these laws are technically unenforceable because of the US Constitution, but is it really that surprising that 8 different states in the US don't want atheists to be in office? I am personally just shocked that Alabama and Oklahoma didn't join in on the fun. Welcome to another Religious Maps and Graphs video. Just like last time, most of these come from social scientist Dr. Ryan Burge, one of the only people that makes Twitter even somewhat bearable for me. I did pull a few from Reddit this time, but only those that actually cited a reputable source. You can find links to everything that I use down in the description. Oh, and I wanted to say this time, hello Dr. Burge, I'm glad that you seem to approve of the last video, and I hope you don't mind me doing another one of these. You know, I like to make sure and cite where I got all this stuff from. This video would not be possible without you, so thank you. If you get a few Twitter followers from me, that's the least that I can possibly do to repay you for your work. Second largest religious tradition in each state. Okay, this one's kind of old, 2010. Of course, Christianity is the largest religion in every state. These are just the runners-up. The first thing I find remarkable is just how prevalent Judaism is. Judaism is actually not that big of a religion, especially compared to something like Islam. I thought that places like Ohio, Pennsylvania, more of the Northeast was going to be more Islamic. I thought New York, sure, Judaism, but I didn't expect this spread. Also, Judaism in Minnesota, I'm surprised at that. I wonder if that's changed in recent years. This map is something like 12 years old. You know what, if you guys know of an updated version of this map, I'd really like to see it. Maybe I'll cover it in a future video and correct any issues here. Islam in Texas, not surprising. Florida, not surprising. The other parts of the South, I just imagine that a lot of Muslims there are not treated particularly well. That's all I can think about when I see that. South Carolina, Baha'is are so rare. I mean, there's so few in the entire world that's hard to believe. I almost think maybe a bunch of Baha'is are somehow registered there in some official organizational way, even though they don't actually live there, and they're being counted by some. Maybe it's true, but I'm just inclined to doubt that because Baha'i is not a large faith at all. Hindus get a very random selection of Delaware and Arizona. I'm not surprised that Hindu is the second most in any given state, really, but Delaware and Arizona. Odd. And then Buddhists on the West Coast and kind of in the Rockies. I think that makes sense. I'm a bit surprised at Oklahoma. That doesn't seem to fall in line particularly well. I would imagine they'd be, in line with the rest of the South, so I guess Islam. All right, starting to check out some of Ryan Burge's work here. This is the Christian denomination with most adherents in each state. We'll see how this contrasts to the last one. Catholic Church is very dominant here, almost the entire country. I would say I'm surprised about Texas because it just feels so Protestant much of the time, but South Texas it's a different game. The Southern Baptist Convention really dominating the Bible Belt. I guess the Bible in the Bible Belt must be either NIV or New King James. It just occurred to me that a lot of my viewers might not actually get that. Huh. Yeah, I guess you had to be there. And by be there, I mean traumatized by the Southern Baptist Church in some way. Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, big mouthful there, dominating Utah and Idaho. In my last Maps and Graphs video, Someone let me know that it's now kind of considered taboo or offensive to Mormons at least, to call them Mormons now because they had a name change a while back. But I have never obeyed or respected Mormon church doctrine. Not when they were barring black people from the priesthood. Not when they were saying that the more you believe, the more white and delightsome you become. Not when they not just pressure, but severely indoctrinate so many of their children. And I will not be obeying and respecting their doctrine anytime soon. Of course, I will be kind and compassionate toward any Mormon that I speak to or Latter-day Saint that I speak to. And if me calling them a Mormon in the conversation with them somehow impedes our progress or our camaraderie in any discussion, then sure, I'll call them what they prefer. I think that's just basic respect. But when I'm making an educational video and I'm talking about Mormons, which is what everyone knows them as, I will call them Mormons. Sorry. And lastly, West Virginia, Washington, and Alaska being non-denominational primarily. What a weird smattering of places. All right, let's change it up from the last maps video and look at a couple of world maps. 4 in 10 countries have official state religions or preferred religions. You've got a lot of former Soviet countries being hostile to religious institutions, plus China and Vietnam. And then mostly Islamic countries having an official state religion, North Africa, Middle East, South Central Asia. Makes sense. Russia says preferred or favored. I really do wonder where they're headed with that now. I mean, Putin is saying that his enemies are like possessed by and influenced by Satan himself, and the Christian Russian people must rise up and defeat Satan. So we'll see where that takes things. If you want to hear more about that craziness from a reliable source, then I'll link a video by Religiolog down in the description so you can check that out. Putin is insane. You have Iceland, the UK, Norway, and Denmark all having an official state religion, but also having religious freedom. But on top of that, also being some of the most atheistic, if not the most atheistic countries in the world. Funny how that works out. Clearly, official state religion can work in several different ways. You definitely do not have religious freedom in somewhere like Saudi Arabia that has an official state religion, but elsewhere you might. I imagine that preferred or favored is even more variable. I'm familiar with this at least because my wife grew up in Indonesia, but Indonesia has official religions that you basically have to identify as in order to be a citizen there. What I was told as to why they have official religions that you must identify as to be a citizen is they were kind of fearfully reacting to Chinese-style communism, which is, of course, extremely harsh to any religious establishment, and they didn't want to be that way. They wanted to be something else, possibly more like Europe or the West generally, so they were like, you have to be religious here. I don't think in most places in Indonesia they really care all that much, though. You can sign up and say you're whatever, and no government man's going to come knocking on your door because you didn't go to church enough. But it's different everywhere. If you live in a place that has a preferred religion, tell me about your experience. Why do they do this? What does that look like? More from Ryan Burge. What is the relationship between economic advancement and religiosity at the country level? It's clearly negative. In countries where GDP is less than $25,000, more than 75% think religion is very important. Among countries where GDP is greater than $35,000, 15% or less think religion is very important. Starting over here where there is a lot of poverty, Ethiopia, Senegal, almost 100% say that religion is very important. You increase the GDP just a little bit, Paraguay, Georgia, and you see a serious drop in people saying that religion is very important to them. Keep going, Mexico, Argentina, Chile, Croatia, it keeps going down. It looks like there's a kind of sweet spot between Japan and Sweden where GDP is higher, and it doesn't need to be any higher for them to say that religion is not very important. After this point, it seems like GDP and religiosity has more of a positive correlation. A huge part of that is probably the US, which is a massive outlier. I mean, really high GDP, and look at where we are. We're more comparable to Greece or Romania or Paraguay, at least as far as religiosity. I've discussed in several previous videos that the more stable, the more prosperous a society gets, typically the less religious people are, indicating that religion is a kind of social safety net in a way. It's something that makes people feel like they are flourishing when the things that they need to flourish, the actual material that they need to flourish, is not necessarily there. This graph seems to reinforce that idea. Map of world religions. I could spend all day looking at this, but I'll try to keep this one brief. Let's look at how Europe is divided up. So you have Ireland, Spain, Portugal, France, Italy, Croatia, all Catholic. But then you start shifting over to Protestantism a bit when you get into Germany, Denmark, and Northern Europe. Then back to Catholicism when you get over to Poland. But then you keep going east and you see lots of Orthodoxy. They're not all the same kind of Orthodox, but I guess they get the same color. And look at this, interesting. There's a type of Buddhism that is predominant in, weird, I looked it up because I thought it would be another country, but no, that is Russia. That's just Russia. There's a Buddhist part of Russia? And it's not in the east? What? Wow, I definitely learned something. You have the only blue part of the map, Israel here. Cool to see how Islam is divided up. Although I do kind of wonder about how they got the data, because isn't Saudi, at least they self-report to be 100% Sunni, and this is saying that at least part of their population seems to be Shia. Africa divided by north and south by Sunni Islam and a combination of Christianity and folk religions. Madagascar's just got a dot of Catholicism right in the middle. Here's something I find interesting, I think especially because my wife grew up in Indonesia. Most of Indonesia is Sunni, but because of Dutch colonization, I believe, there are many places that are Protestant, especially when you get over to the east, like this, West Papua. Yeah, I could go through this forever, but we should move on. Wait, one last thing. I like how all this says no religion. Does that just mean no people? This is not really a religious map, but because conversion therapy is such a religious issue where I live, I tend to see it in that way. As you can see, most of the world, including Western Europe, does nothing about conversion therapy at all. Only Germany has it illegal. Germany-based, Brazil-based, Ecuador-based. France, UK, Iceland, Northern Europe, Poland, the rest of all of Europe and Asia, just whack, all of them. Interesting, Canada says limited because, maybe I'm mistaken here, but I thought the Trudeau administration made this federally illegal in Canada. This was made in 2020, so maybe that has happened since this map was made. Just for any of you who are not familiar with conversion therapy means trying to use some kind of psychological or, let's face it, religious technique or intervention to change someone's sexual orientation. Now, no rigorous scientific study has ever shown conversion therapy to work, but that is not why people believe that it works. People believe that it works, at least where I live, entirely because of religious reasons. Outside of the US, I can't completely say, but no, it does not work. No method has ever worked. Just like you can't force someone to be gay, you can't force them to be straight. Cue the religious anecdotes in the comments. Well, I read this book, Gay Girl, Good God, or I read this book from Christopher Yuan, and they said they were gay, but through the love of Christ, they became... No, they didn't. They just feel bad about being gay. Besides, anecdotes, not data. Show me a study, I dare you. Okay, back to the US now. This one might be the most shocking in this video. You ready for this? Share of each religious tradition that self-identifies as evangelical or born again. Protestant, there's a bunch. Catholic, there's some. Orthodox, there's some. Christian, yeah, lots of Christians actually identify as evangelical, even if they're not Protestant now. But look at this. 19% of Republican Jews identify as evangelical. When it comes to Muslims, 39% of Republican Muslims identify as evangelical. Buddhists, 25% of Republicans identify as evangelical. Hindu, if you're Republican, 37% identify as evangelical. How crazy is that? Evangelical is not a religious identifier to many people. It's primarily a political one. I think we all realize at this point that for Christians, identifying as evangelical is simultaneously theological and political. But for non-Christians, it seems to be primarily political enough that they can identify as that without actually indicating that they are Christian. Of course, as we see, most non-Christians who identify as evangelical are Republican, but there's still a substantial minority of Hindus, Buddhists, especially Muslims, and Jews who are Democrat and identify as evangelical. I love this tweet in response to Ryan Burge. Loving the 2% of born-again agnostic independent. Imagine being born again and picking absolutely zero sides in religion and politics. What do you think? Is this the most shocking thing in this video? It is to me. The 20 largest religious traditions in the United States. Catholic Church winning out by a huge margin, but with a huge lead over anyone else. Non-denominational is in second place. Of course, non-denominational is without a denomination, but they're usually Protestants of a somewhat Southern Baptist flavor, but maybe without a lot of the dogma or ties to segregation like the Southern Baptist Convention has. I'm sure the non-denominational are more diverse than Baptists, but from my experience at several of these churches, they're quite similar to any moderate Baptist church that I ever went to. All right, look at where Islam is on this list, and then go all the way to the bottom and look at where Orthodox Judaism is. Now, there are other kinds of Judaism. I see another tweet from Ryan Burge that says that conservative Jews have a significant, but still small number compared to the rest on this list. There's also a significant proportion of Reformed Jews in the U.S., but even all those together gets nowhere close to rivaling Islam, but still apparently they're the second largest religion in many states? I'm confused. Speaking of the non-denominational folks, percent of all adherents who are non-denominational. This is color-coded with the purple and blue being the highest percentages, 15 to more than 20%. You have a bunch in Washington, Oregon, Colorado, Oklahoma, Ohio, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida. Not any discernible geographic distribution there. I mean, they're not along any kind of mountain range or ethnic group or anything, it seems like. I imagine we're going to see this continue to increase, and the majority denomination in many more states in just a few years will actually be no denomination. California, Utah, Massachusetts all say, no, we like our denominations here. Number of people per religious congregation. Ryan Burge says, in the United States, there are 461 people for every religious congregation. So this is not the size of congregation, but this is the ratio of people to the number of congregations there are in the area. On the liberal West Coast, you have a lot of people per religious congregation. On the East Coast, same deal. In Michigan, same thing again. Around the Chicago area, again, same thing. In Florida and Louisiana, interestingly enough, southern Louisiana at least, you have the same thing. What we're seeing here is the effect of places that have large populations, but in places that have large, denser populations, you tend to see a little bit less religion, and so that is borne out here too. If you go to very rural places in the US, so here in the deep south, a bit in Appalachia, and especially along the eastern side of the Rockies, you're going to see a lot of religious congregations for the amount of people they have there. Oh, I like the colors on this one. Percent of each county that is part of a religious body. The darker the color, the higher the percentage of people. Look at that. Just east of the Rockies, you're seeing a high percentage of people that belong to a religious body. And no surprise, plenty of people in the Bible Belt. Utah is all about belonging to a religious community. Here's an interesting spot to look at. Everything that surrounds New York City seems to have a high percentage of belonging to a religious congregation. New Hampshire and Oregon seem to be the ones with the least religious belonging there. But if you watch the last Maps and Graphs video that I did, then that should not surprise you. Here's one I find really fascinating. If American religion was represented by 1,000 people, Protestant being the largest by far, with nothing in particular coming in second, and Catholic in third. It is kind of shocking to see how big atheist and agnostic look in comparison to the rest. I mean, you have more than Jews or Mormons, Muslims, Buddhists. Here's Ryan Burge's interesting commentary. For every Mormon in the US, there are 76 Christians. For every Muslim, there are 53 Christians. For every Jew, there are 25 Christians. Most Americans are still Christian. Yeah, even with how big nothing in particular is there, if you combine Protestant and Catholic, it's no contest. They beat everything else combined. I'm old enough to remember the hysteria around Muslims in the wake of 9/11, lots of concern that they were trying to take over the country. In 2020, there are 10 counties in the US where Muslims are at least 6% of the population. 2,627 have no measurable Muslim population. And there's the spread. It's hard to even see any of those counties that have more than 6%. 6% being a tiny amount to begin with. It looks like New York City, Detroit, somewhere in New Mexico that I'm not familiar with. I had no idea that there was like a Muslim community that was that significant in New Mexico. Proportionally, at least, I should say. Maybe there's just not a lot of people in that county. I think this is Buffalo, New York, the Chicago area. But yeah, the point is Muslims are not a particularly significant portion of the population in almost anywhere in the US. I also remember the hysteria around Muslims. You know, I remember being in church and them preaching sermons about how they're going to come and take over and Christians need to have more babies to deal with the, impending surge of Muslims. It's just xenophobia is all it was. I shouldn't say was either. People still think like this. I still think that there's hysteria around Muslims being here. It's just that it may not be as publicly discussed as it was around that time. While I personally have many disagreements with the doctrine in most forms of Islam, I will say that Islam and Muslims are two different things. Muslims are welcome as my neighbors. I'm happy to treat you well as long as you treat me well. And you know what? Every Muslim I've ever known in the US has felt the same way. All right, last one, and I include it because not very long ago, I was driving through just rural Texas and saw that there seems to be a Methodist church everywhere I go in every tiny little town. I'm like, how did they have the time to establish all of these? Is there a Methodist church everywhere in like every town with more than 2,000 people in the US? Well, Ryan Burge tweeted something about that. Counties that have a United Methodist Church. Red is yes, gray is no. Basically everywhere except for Alaska and Utah are almost 100% yes. Throughout the entire Midwest, all of the East Coast, north to south, it's just all yeses. The United Methodist Church has truly explored and established territory everywhere around the US. Good job, Methodists. He says easily the most geographically dispersed denomination. Yeah, you think? All right, that's all I've got for you guys. I hope you learned something and had a little fun along the way. Remember to check out Dr. Ryan Burge on Twitter. He's definitely worth a follow, and he makes my Twitter experience actually worthwhile, which is really saying something. Go show him some love. With that, thanks for watching. I've been Drew of Genetically Modified Skeptic. A special thanks to my patrons for their constant love and support. If you want to hear more from me, then subscribe. As always, if you are an apostate in need, there are resources linked in the description to help you find community and mental health support. Remember to be kind to others in the comments, and until next time, stay skeptical.